The dim light from the harbor reflected faintly off the advanced submarine, a massive black shadow lying silently concealed beneath the morning mist. The USS Sentinel, the pride of the U.S. Navy, was about to embark on a top-secret mission, one where there was no room for error. On the dock, a man stood quietly, holding a small briefcase. He was dressed in an old military uniform, carefully pressed and adorned with a row of glistening medals on his left chest. This was James Holloway, a retired African-American veteran who was once a famed submarine captain. After decades of service, his role now was merely that of an observer. "Mr. Holloway, this is the USS Sentinel. Welcome aboard," a young officer greeted him, his tone flat as though fulfilling a mandatory task. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes that he couldn't hide. "Thank you," James replied, his voice low but resolute. He stepped onto the gangway, his gait steady, but each step seemed to carry the weight of both glory and sorrow from years past. As he crossed the deck, the surrounding eyes began to focus on him. A young sailor whispered to his comrade, "Who is he? He doesn't look like someone we need for this mission." A faint laugh responded, "Probably just here to see how good we are." James paid them no mind. He was used to those kinds of looks, ones he had encountered countless times throughout his military career. But today, his focus wasn't on earning their respect, it was on the mission ahead. Inside the submarine's briefing room, Captain Marcus Kane, a stern-looking man in his 40s, stood before an electronic map explaining the mission details. "Our objective is to infiltrate the enemy's patrol zone without being detected and gather data on their new radar system. This is an absolutely classified operation. We must not engage, nor can we reveal our position," Marcus emphasized, his sharp gaze sweeping across everyone in the room. James sat quietly at the back, observing. When the meeting concluded, he approached Marcus. "Captain Kane," James spoke, his tone calm yet commanding, "I have a few suggestions regarding our approach strategy. The low-frequency radar the enemy is using might be more complex than we expect." Marcus turned around, looking James up and down before responding coldly. "Thank you for the advice, Captain Holloway. However, I believe my team is thoroughly prepared. We will ensure the mission's success." James nodded and stepped back without another word. He knew overconfidence could be a double-edged sword, but now wasn't the time for debate. That evening, the crew's mess hall buzzed with laughter and chatter. A group of sailors huddled in one corner, gossiping. "Who is that old man Holloway anyway? Why did they even bring him on board?" a young sailor remarked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "He looks like he's from the era of steam-powered submarines." First Officer Jackson joined in, chuckling. "Probably here as an honorary advisor, but honestly, I haven't seen him do anything besides sit there and watch us work." The group burst into laughter. Across the mess hall, James quietly continued his meal, seemingly oblivious to their words. Yet, his gaze grew colder, sharper. He knew the lack of respect wasn't just directed at him, it reflected a deeper issue of prejudice. Later, James stood alone on the deck, gazing at the starlit night sky. In his heart, he resolved, "We're not here to prove ourselves. We're here to complete the mission. And I won't let anyone jeopardize it." What do you think about the skeptical looks James faced the moment he stepped aboard? Could you maintain the same composure as he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you're finding this story captivating, don't forget to follow. Join James on this challenging journey ahead. The air in the cramped control room was tense, yet every crew member remained fully focused. Lights on the control panels blinked rhythmically, accompanied by the steady hum of machinery that had become a familiar cadence. The USS Sentinel was now entering its target waters. Every person aboard understood that this mission had no room for error. Estimated arrival at the reconnaissance position is 0300 hours, Captain Marcus Kane announced firmly. Standing tall before the digital map display, he pointed to a red dot marked as the zone of enemy activity. The crew listened intently. James Holloway sat at the back of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze sharp and observant, yet he remained silent. "The strategy is straightforward," Marcus continued. "We'll use the submarine's stealth mode to approach the enemy's radar zone, collect the data, and withdraw without leaving a trace. No engagements, no countermeasures, and absolutely no exposure of our position. Is that clear?" "Clear, Captain," came the unified response. But James could detect a subtle tone of overconfidence in a few voices. As the meeting concluded and the crew dispersed, James approached Marcus. Captain Kane, he began, his tone calm yet authoritative. I believe we should reevaluate the approach strategy. Based on the data I've reviewed, the enemy's radar may detect lower frequencies. We might need to adjust our speed or route to avoid detection. Marcus's displeasure was evident as he looked at James, his expression hardening. I appreciate your input, Captain Holloway, Marcus replied, emphasizing appreciate with a hint of sarcasm. However, this plan has been in the works for weeks and was approved by command. I trust my team. We know what we're doing. James refrained from pressing the matter further. He knew that arguing now would only escalate tensions unnecessarily. He nodded, his composed demeanor unshaken. As the submarine glided silently through the pitch-black waters, the crew began exchanging murmurs. The conversation inevitably turned to James and his presence on the mission. I don't understand why they brought him along, one sailor muttered while monitoring the sonar display. We've got enough skilled people to handle this job. Maybe they think we lack experience, another sailor quipped, his laugh laced with derision. But bringing along some expired old-timer just adds more weight. Around 2 a.m., an anomaly appeared on the sonar screen in the sonar room. Harris, a young sonar operator, furrowed his brow as he scrutinized the readings. Captain, we have an unusual signal approximately 500 meters away, Harris reported. Marcus Kane stepped forward, glanced quickly at the screen, and waved dismissively. Probably just signal interference. Our submarine is in stealth mode. Don't worry about it. James, standing quietly in the corner of the room, watched the screen with a serious expression. It's not signal interference, he said calmly but firmly. That's active sonar. They're searching for us. Marcus spun around, his irritation clearly visible. Captain Holloway, I've already told you, I'm in command here. I guarantee this submarine is undetectable. If you have nothing else to do, please let us handle our work. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. James nodded without arguing, though his eyes remained fixed on the radar screen. He knew the danger was closer than anyone realized. In the crew's quarters, the conversation continued to center on James. He just likes to act like he knows everything, First Officer Jackson remarked to a group of sailors. The truth is, his time has passed. Technology today isn't what it used to be. We don't need someone sitting around judging everything, another sailor chimed in. But in another corner, a younger sailor named Daniels whispered to his crewmate, "Did you see the way he was watching the screen? There's something professional about it. I don't think he's just an ordinary guy." "Drop it," Daniels, his companion, cut him off. "Don't overthink it. Just focus on your own job." James returned to his quarters and quietly jotted a few notes into his notebook. A heavy sense of foreboding weighed on him. He had spotted warning signs that the others were ignoring, but he also knew that on a mission like this, even a small mistake could come with catastrophic consequences. He glanced at his watch. Just a few hours left before everything could spiral out of control. When faced with a team that doubts your expertise, what would you do? Share your thoughts on how James is handling the situation. Will he earn their respect, or will things take a darker turn? We'd love to hear your insights. The story has just begun, and the challenges ahead are only getting tougher. Follow along to ensure you don't miss the next twists in this gripping journey. The atmosphere aboard the USS Sentinel grew increasingly tense as the submarine edged closer to its target zone. The subtle jabs and lack of respect directed toward former Captain James Holloway became more blatant. Yet, James remained calm, continuing to observe and analyze the situation with quiet focus. In the mess hall, the crew gathered to chat after their shifts. A group of sailors sat at one corner, occasionally glancing at James, who was seated alone nearby. "All he's done so far is stare at the radar," one sailor remarked sarcastically. "Yeah," another chimed in. "Maybe he's reminiscing about his glory days." Soft laughter rippled through the group. First Officer Jackson entered, catching part of the conversation, and joined in. "I told you from the start, someone like him, way past his prime, only distracts the rest of us. This is our mission, not a place for anyone to relive their memories." James remained unruffled, calmly finishing his meal as if he hadn't heard the remarks. But a young sailor, Daniels, looked visibly uncomfortable. He turned to Jackson. "Sir, what if he really does have valuable experience? Maybe we should listen to him." Jackson shot Daniels a sharp glare. "Are you questioning my judgment, Daniels? Focus on your own job." Daniels lowered his head and said nothing more. Back in the control room, Sonar Officer Harris detected another unusual signal. This time, the signal was stronger and moving closer. "Captain, this signal. It's heading straight for us," Harris reported. Captain Marcus Kane stood before the radar screen, frowning. Despite this, his confidence remained unwavering. "It's just a civilian vessel or a whale. Our radar is undetectable. Stay on course." James stepped closer to Harris, scrutinizing the screen. "This isn't signal interference or a civilian ship," he said firmly. "They're using active sonar. The enemy has found us." Marcus turned sharply toward James, irritation clear on his face. "Mr. Holloway, I've told you before, I'm the captain here. Don't alarm my crew with unnecessary theories." James didn't argue, simply nodding before leaving the control room. Yet, his eyes betrayed growing concern. On his way back to his quarters, James encountered First Officer Jackson in the corridor. Jackson stopped abruptly, crossing his arms and blocking James's path. "Who do you think you are to question the captain in front of the crew?" Jackson demanded, his tone harsh. James met Jackson's gaze squarely, his voice calm yet firm. "I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm doing what I believe is right to protect this ship." "Then stick to your job." "Sit still and observe," Jackson retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Leave the commanding to those who are actually capable." James didn't respond. He stepped around Jackson, leaving the frustrated first officer standing in the corridor. After James left the control room, the unusual signal persisted. Harris, unable to ignore it any longer, looked nervously at the captain. "Captain, I think we should investigate further." "What if it's an enemy submarine hunter?" Harris suggested. Marcus turned to Harris, his tone firm. "We don't have time to worry about hypotheticals. Focus on the mission." Just then, a small explosion echoed in the distance. While not immediately dangerous, it was strong enough to make the submarine vibrate slightly. The control room fell silent. "What was that?" Marcus demanded loudly. Harris quickly examined the screen. "Captain, I believe they've just dropped depth charges to locate us." The room plunged into a tense quiet. Marcus's gaze darted around, caught between maintaining his decisiveness and grappling with unease. In the crew quarters, several sailors had been laughing and joking, but the small explosion caused the lights to flicker. The atmosphere turned oppressive. Daniels rushed to find James. "Captain Holloway," Daniels said, his voice urgent. "They found us, haven't they?" James looked at Daniels, pausing for a moment before answering. "I'm afraid so. But Captain Kane won't easily admit that. What do we do now?" "If they're hunting us, we're in serious danger," Daniels said, his face full of concern. "Wait," James replied, his voice steady. "The right moment will come." The submarine was now engulfed in a blanket of tension. James knew that time was running out. He left the crew quarters and returned to his own cabin, where he began reviewing the strategic documents he had brought along. In his mind, contingency plans were forming, one by one. If the situation continued to deteriorate, he would have to step in. Another explosion rocked the submarine, this one much stronger, causing the entire vessel to shudder violently. James rose to his feet, his eyes sharp and resolute. "Now, they'll have to listen," he muttered to himself. The darkness of the ocean depths enveloped the USS Sentinel, creating an oppressive atmosphere thick with tension. Following the series of strange signals, the officers began to sense the impending danger. Yet Captain Marcus Kane remained steadfast in his confidence, refusing to believe the enemy could detect their submarine. A powerful explosion suddenly rocked the entire vessel. The control room lights flickered erratically, and alarms blared throughout the submarine. "What's happening?" Marcus shouted, his eyes darting across the screens in front of him. Harris, the sonar operator, responded frantically, "Captain, it's depth charges. I think they're actively searching for us." "That's impossible. They can't detect us," Marcus roared, but his expression betrayed growing concern. James entered the control room, his voice low yet firm. "They've found us. This is no longer speculation." "Mr. Holloway, I don't have time to argue with you," Marcus snapped, spinning toward him. "I'm the one in command here, and I'm here to ensure the safety of this submarine," James countered, his tone unshaken. "If you don't act now, we won't have a chance to survive." Harris interrupted, shouting, "Captain, the enemy vessel is closing in. I think they're preparing another round of depth charges." Marcus hesitated, gripping the armrest of his command chair tightly. The confidence he had exuded earlier seemed to waver. James stepped closer, his voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Captain Kane, this is no time to hesitate. If you don't order an immediate deep dive, we're all going to die." The control room fell silent as all eyes turned to Marcus, awaiting his decision. After a few tense moments, Marcus nodded, his voice low but resolute. "Deep dive. Take us to 300 meters." The submarine began descending into the crushing depths of the ocean. The hull groaned and creaked under the increasing pressure of the water. But before they could stabilize, another barrage of depth charges exploded nearby. The force of the blast shook the entire vessel, throwing several officers to the floor. The hull's under massive strain, an engineer's voice crackled urgently over the intercom from the engine room. "If we keep descending at this speed, it'll rupture." "Reduce the dive speed," Marcus ordered immediately. But James, standing nearby, quickly intervened. "No. If we reduce speed, we won't escape the depth charge zone in time." "Dive an additional 50 meters," James ordered sharply. Marcus glared at him, his expression a mix of anger and helplessness. "Are you trying to get us all killed? We either dive deeper or we're destroyed here and now." "The choice is yours," James replied coldly. As the submarine descended further, the groaning and creaking of the hull grew louder, amplifying the crew's unease. "Current pressure is 450 bars. Nearing the safety limit," the engineer reported from the engine room. "We can't take much more of this," another officer shouted. "If the hull ruptures, we're done for." Standing in front of the sonar screen, James raised his voice. "We're almost out of the danger zone. Just a few more minutes." Another explosion sounded, but this time it was farther away. Harris looked up, exhaling in relief. "We've made it past them. The depth charges are no longer close." Just as the crew began to think they had escaped danger, the control room lights switched to red, and an alarm blared from the ship's systems. "Main engine failure." "We've lost propulsion," the engineer yelled over the intercom. Marcus's face went pale. "How is that possible?" James quickly scanned the screens. "The enemy has noticed we've stopped. If we don't repair the engines within 10 minutes, they'll locate us." "Send the repair team to the engine room immediately," Marcus ordered. As chaos erupted in the control room, James stepped into the center, pulling a badge and a classified document from his pocket. "I no longer have time to argue with any of you," he announced, his voice resolute. "I am a special commander assigned by the Department of Defense, and I am now officially taking over command of this vessel." Marcus shot to his feet, his eyes wide. "What are you saying?" James held the badge up to Marcus's face. "This is a direct order from command. If you don't believe me, verify it." A young officer quickly confirmed the information through the communications system. When the verification came back positive, the room fell into stunned silence. Marcus, his face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation, reluctantly nodded. James immediately ordered the submarine to power down all non-essential systems to minimize sonar detection. He directed the repair team, working closely with the chief engineer, to restart the engines. After 15 grueling minutes, the main engine roared back to life. The submarine dove deeper, moving swiftly away from the enemy radar zone. Another barrage of depth charges exploded, but this time they detonated harmlessly in open water, far from the submarine. "We're clear," Harris said, his voice full of relief. "How did you feel as the USS Sentinel faced depth charges and the threat of destruction?" James's bold actions saved the crew, but can he keep them safe from further danger? Share your thoughts now. The story is reaching its peak tension, and every decision will determine the fate of the crew. Don't forget to follow for the next critical updates. After narrowly escaping the depth charges, the atmosphere in the control room of the USS Sentinel remained taut as a drawn wire. The crew was still reeling from the harrowing events, now forced to grapple with the reality that the enemy had pinpointed their presence. The danger was far from over, and James Holloway was now officially in command. The ship's intercom crackled with the urgent voice of the chief engineer from the engine room commander. "The main engine is still malfunctioning. While it's temporarily stable, continued deep dives or increased speed could lead to overheating." James picked up the intercom, his voice resolute. "I need the main engine operational long enough to get us out of this danger zone. Deploy the engineering team to conduct a full inspection and repairs." Marcus, sitting in a side chair, still hadn't recovered from the shock of losing his command. He shot a displeased look at James. "Do you think it's that simple? If the engine fails completely, we'll be sitting ducks." James turned, his eyes steely. Captain Kane, worrying won't help us. Action is what we need. As the engineering team got to work, James studied the tactical map. The enemy's movements were clearly visible on the display. They're employing an encirclement strategy, James informed the officers. They're dropping depth charges in a fan-shaped pattern to corner us into a kill zone. If we don't break out now, we'll be annihilated. Harris, the sonar officer, asked nervously. What's the plan, Commander? James pointed to a deep trench on the map. This is the deepest part of the seafloor in this area. If we dive here, we can temporarily hide and mislead the enemy. An officer voiced his concern, but Commander, that area is full of whirlpools and strong currents. There's a high risk of getting trapped. James nodded. I'm aware. But it's our only chance. We either take the risk or we perish. Marcus stood abruptly, unable to contain himself any longer. I can't support this plan. You're risking the lives of the entire crew unnecessarily. James stepped closer to Marcus, his gaze unwavering. Risk is unavoidable in war, Captain Kane. But I'm not gambling anyone's life. I'm making a decision to ensure all of us survive. If you have a better idea, I'm willing to hear it. Marcus fell silent, his mouth slightly open but no words coming out. The other officers remained quiet, their eyes fixed on James. Finally, Marcus sank back into his chair, saying nothing more. James issued his orders: prepare to dive to 400 meters. Reduce speed to minimum and shut down all non-essential systems. We need absolute silence. The USS Sentinel began its deeper descent into the ocean floor. The hull continued to groan and creak under the immense water pressure. At 400 meters, the warning lights turned amber, and the chief engineer reported, pressure is at its maximum limit. The hull can hold, but not for much longer. James studied the radar screen, where the signals from enemy vessels grew closer. He spoke in a calm but firm voice. We cannot make a single sound. Shut down all engines. Turn everything off. In near total darkness, the crew held their breath. Time seemed to stand still as they waited. Suddenly, a barrage of depth charges dropped directly above the USS Sentinel. The powerful explosions rocked the submarine, dislodging some equipment from their mounts. A sailor shouted in panic, "Have they found us?" James, remaining calm, issued a firm order: silence. This is their final sweep. If we make no noise, they'll move on. The sound of explosions continued, but none were close enough to inflict serious damage. After several tense minutes, the enemy signals on the radar began to move away. Harris exhaled in relief. They're retreating, Commander. We're clear. James nodded, but his eyes remained sharp with caution. We're only temporarily safe. Prepare to restart the engines and leave this area immediately. As the submarine returned to operational status, Marcus Kane approached James. I doubted you from the moment you came aboard, Marcus admitted, his tone low. But what you did today, I have to admit, you saved us. James looked at Marcus, responding gently. None of us wanted to face this situation. But when we're here, we have to do what needs to be done. Marcus nodded silently and walked away. The other officers began to regard James differently. The disdain in their eyes was gone, replaced with genuine respect. The USS Sentinel slowly left the danger zone, but James knew the ordeal wasn't over. Though the submarine was safe for now, he could still feel the weight of the mission bearing down on him. The enemy would not give up easily, and the task was far from complete. In the darkness of the ocean depths, James penned a note in his journal when faced with death. We don't need heroes. We just need people who know the right moment to act. After diving deep to evade the depth charges, the USS Sentinel remained in near total silence. Though the enemy signals had faded, James Holloway knew they were still in a precarious situation. The enemy fleet could return at any moment, and the Sentinel had yet to complete its mission. The submarine began restarting its engines to leave the area. However, red warning lights flashed across the control panel. Auxiliary engines are offline, the chief engineer shouted over the intercom. We're down to the main engine, but it doesn't have enough power to get us out of this zone quickly. James pondered for a few moments before turning to Marcus Kane. We need to use the ocean currents to boost our speed. But this requires exceptional piloting skills. For the first time, Marcus showed no resistance. He nodded. Do what you need to do. James moved to the navigation area and pointed at the digital map. This zone has strong underwater currents that can help propel us out of the enemy radar range. However, If we don't adjust our course precisely, we risk being dragged into the trench or colliding with underwater rocks." The navigation officer hesitated, visibly anxious. "Commander, navigating this current is extremely risky. There's no room for error." James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, his tone steady. "I trust you. This is our only way to survive." The USS Sentinel entered the powerful current, and everyone held their breath. The immense water pressure caused the hull to groan louder, and the submarine shook violently. Some crew members were thrown from their stations as the turbulence intensified. Harris reported urgently, "Commander, the current is pushing us off course." Standing behind the navigation officer, James quickly issued a command: "Adjust the heading by 5 degrees south. Maintain speed." Suddenly, a massive underwater rock formation appeared on the radar, only 300 meters ahead. Marcus leapt to his feet. "Veer off now." James shouted firmly, "Don't veer. Maintain speed. If we change course, the submarine will lose stability and be sucked into the vortex." The control room fell into stunned silence. The navigation officer, his hands trembling, obeyed the command. The rock formation scraped past the side of the submarine, missing by only a few meters. A collective sigh of relief spread through the crew as they realized they had narrowly escaped disaster. Just as the USS Sentinel emerged from the current and prepared to restart its engines, Harris's voice broke through the tension with alarm: "Commander, enemy vessels are returning. We have about 5 minutes before they come within sonar range." James frowned, quickly assessing the situation. "They won't let us escape so easily. If we're detected again, our chances of survival will drop to zero." He turned to the officers. "Prepare to deploy decoys. We need to mislead them one last time." James ordered the release of submarine signal mimics, devices designed to emit sounds and signals identical to a real submarine, fooling enemy radar. "Drop the decoys in 3 separate locations. Make them believe we're moving in 3 different directions," James instructed, his tone firm and decisive. As the decoys were deployed, the radar screen lit up with 3 new signals. The enemy vessels began dispersing, chasing the false targets and reducing pressure on the USS Sentinel. "Restart the main engine. Full speed ahead out of the area," James commanded. For the first time, Marcus added his voice: "Everyone, hold your positions. This is our last chance." The USS Sentinel accelerated, racing out of the danger zone while the enemy ships pursued the false signals. The entire crew held their breath until Harris announced, "Enemy signals are now out of radar range. We're safe." The control room erupted in collective relief, with deep exhalations and muted cheers. Yet James remained still, his eyes sharp and vigilant. As calm returned, Marcus approached James, his tone devoid of the earlier resistance. "You saved our lives. I doubted you from the beginning, but now I understand why you were sent here." "Thank you, James." James nodded, his response measured. "We're a team. I just did what needed to be done." Harris and the other officers regarded James with newfound respect. A young sailor whispered to a companion, "He's not just a former captain. He's a legend." The USS Sentinel moved further away from the danger zone, heading toward a safe area to complete its reconnaissance mission. In the quiet of his small cabin, James sat and wrote in his journal, "We can overcome any danger if we place our trust in the right people and act at the right moment. But the journey isn't over yet." James led the crew to safety in the nick of time. What do you think allows him to remain so calm under pressure? Share your thoughts on this moment. We'd love to hear what you think. If you love gripping moments like this, don't forget to follow. There are many more thrilling developments ahead. After escaping the danger zone, the USS Sentinel made its way toward its final target position to complete the reconnaissance mission. Despite the temporary safety, the pressure weighed heavily on the crew. Everyone understood that even a minor mistake could undo all their efforts. In the living quarters, sailors exchanged quiet conversations while occasionally glancing at James Holloway. No longer seen as the washed-up old man they had once dismissed, he had become a figure of genuine respect. "Did you see how he handled everything, Daniels?" the young sailor said to his comrade. "If it weren't for him, we'd be finished." "Yeah," the other replied with a nod. "I've never seen anyone stay that calm in such a high-stress situation." Across the room, First Officer Jackson sat silently, occasionally glancing toward James, who stood alone in the distance. Finally, Jackson approached him. Stopping a few feet away, Jackson hesitated before speaking. Captain Holloway, he began in a low voice, I owe you an apology. I've treated you unfairly since you came aboard. James turned, his calm gaze meeting Jackson's. Don't dwell on it. What matters is that everyone is safe. Jackson nodded, though his regret was evident. I misjudged you based on appearances. Thank you for saving us. James offered a faint smile. On a submarine, everyone is a part of the machine. We're only strong when we work together. Remember that. In the control room, Harris and the sonar team reported, Commander, we've reached enemy radar range. Beginning data collection. James stood at the control console, monitoring the enemy's radar signals. He issued precise instructions: maintain slow speed and stable depth. Don't let any signals be detected. The data collection process began. The crew remained in absolute silence, the only sounds coming from the humming and clicks of the submarine's equipment. An unusual signal appeared on the sonar screen. Harris sounded the alarm, Commander. We've got an unidentified object moving toward us. Distance is 1,000 meters and closing rapidly. Marcus frowned. Have they found us? James shook his head. No. It's a small patrol vessel. They might just be passing through the area by coincidence. But we can't let our guard down. The enemy patrol vessel approached closer, and the tension in the control room mounted as the crew struggled to remain calm. Distance 500 meters, Commander Harris reported, his voice taut with anxiety. James raised his hand in a decisive gesture. Shut down all auxiliary systems. Maintain absolute silence. The USS Sentinel plunged into an eerie stillness. The crew held their breath as the enemy patrol vessel passed overhead, so close that it seemed mere meters away. Time seemed to freeze. After several excruciatingly tense minutes, the patrol vessel's signal began to move away. We're clear, Harris exhaled with relief. The necessary data had been successfully collected. James issued his next order: withdraw from the area. Maximum speed to the safe rendezvous point. Marcus looked at James and nodded. I'll take the helm. For the first time, Marcus realized that their success hadn't come from advanced technology alone, but from James's decisive leadership. As the submarine retreated to safety, the crew gradually relaxed. A few sailors approached James. Captain Holloway, Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion. We're truly grateful to you. Without you, we wouldn't be here right now. James nodded, his expression warm. You're a fine crew. I just did what a captain is supposed to do. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to James. I've learned so much from you on this journey. Thank you for leading us. James shook Marcus's hand, a faint but genuine smile appearing on his weathered face, brimming with strength and resolve. The USS Sentinel finally returned safely to its base after a perilous mission. At the harbor, bright lights illuminated the submarine's hull, highlighting the scars from its dangerous journey. The crew, exhausted yet deeply relieved, prepared to disembark. But for them, something even more significant had changed: their profound respect for James Holloway. As the hatch opened, a group of high-ranking officers, including officials from the Department of Defense, waited on the dock. A distinguished older admiral stepped forward and extended his hand to James. Captain Holloway, he said in a deep, formal voice, you've accomplished an extraordinary mission. Not only did you bring back critical data, but you also ensured the safety of the entire crew. James nodded, replying humbly, Thank you, Admiral. The success of this mission belongs to the entire team. I merely fulfilled my duty. The sailors standing behind James looked at him with pride in their eyes. They understood that it was his calm demeanor and seasoned expertise that had carried them through what had seemed like an impossible mission. During the debriefing held shortly after, Captain Marcus Kane stood to speak. His voice wavered slightly, but his sincerity was unmistakable. Commanders, Marcus began, at first I doubted the necessity of Captain Holloway's presence on this mission. But I was wrong. He wasn't just the man who saved our lives, he exemplified leadership that I will remember for the rest of my life. Marcus approached James and handed him a commendation letter from the Department of Defense, signed by the Admiral himself. The surrounding sailors broke into applause, their previous skepticism and ridicule replaced entirely by admiration. As the meeting concluded, the crew members came forward one by one to express their gratitude to James. Daniels was the first. Captain, "I'm truly sorry for what I said about you in the beginning," Daniel said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was completely wrong. I owe you my life." James smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on Daniels' shoulder. "No need to apologize, Daniels. What matters is that we got through it together." First Officer Jackson also approached. Though still visibly sheepish, he managed to say, "I've learned an invaluable lesson from you. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it." James nodded, without a hint of reproach. "What matters is that you've recognized your mistake. Use this lesson to become a better leader." During the recognition ceremony, James was invited to address the entire crew. Instead of claiming credit for himself, he turned toward Marcus and the other officers. This journey wasn't about one individual James began. It was about teamwork, overcoming differences, and prioritizing the greater good. Every single member of this team played a critical role in the mission's success. James's words not only inspired admiration but also prompted everyone to reflect on their own contributions to the team. Unity became the greatest lesson of this mission. After the ceremony, James prepared to leave the base and return home. He didn't want to linger, knowing his mission was complete. As he stepped off the submarine, he turned back to look at Marcus, Jackson, and the rest of the crew one last time. "Good luck on your future missions," he said. "Remember, the most important thing on a submarine isn't the technology, it's the trust you have in each other." The crew stood at attention, giving James a formal salute. They knew they were bidding farewell to a legend who had left them with profound lessons in courage, resilience, and leadership. James walked away from the base, stepping into the warm afternoon sunlight. A sense of peace washed over him, knowing he had done everything he could. He didn't seek fame or glory, only the knowledge that he had fulfilled his duty. In those final moments, his image, a steadfast and humble old soldier, became a lasting symbol of true leadership in the hearts of all who had served with him. In the end, James earned the respect he truly deserved. In your opinion, what defines a great leader like James? Share your thoughts. We're inspired by your insights. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to follow and support us. Your engagement is the greatest gift. After leaving the base, James Holloway returned to his small house by the tranquil seaside. It was the place he had always longed to come back to, a sanctuary where he could spend his remaining years in peace and quiet. Yet, the life of a soldier never seemed to conclude so easily. James opened the familiar door, placed his suitcase on the wooden floor, and took a deep breath. The salty breeze and the sound of the waves brought a sense of relief. He stepped out onto the porch, sat in his old rocking chair, and gazed at the endless blue horizon. Taking out the notebook that had accompanied him on his recent mission, he thumbed through its pages, filled with scrawled notes. Every line captured thoughts, decisions, and lessons he had accumulated over the years. Turning to the last page, he added a few more lines. "We cannot choose where we begin, but we can choose how we end." A soldier never truly leaves the battlefield, even if only in his mind. As night fell, James prepared a simple dinner. But just as he sat down at the table, the wall-mounted phone suddenly rang, breaking the silence. He frowned. Few people had this number, and even fewer would call at such a late hour. He picked up the receiver. A familiar voice from the Department of Defense spoke, brisk and urgent. "Captain Holloway, we need you immediately. This is an emergency. One of our submarines is in jeopardy in the Pacific. The last signal indicated they've been detected by enemy forces and are at risk of imminent destruction." James was silent for a few moments, his expression growing serious. "Is there still time?" "By any means necessary, we need you to lead the rescue mission. A ship will transport you there within 12 hours. You're the only one with the experience to handle this." James hung up the phone, the peace he had just found evaporating like mist. Deep down, he knew he wouldn't refuse. The duty of a soldier doesn't end simply because he wishes it to. Opening his closet, James retrieved the neatly pressed uniform he hadn't worn in years. He slipped it on, inspecting each button, each fold, as if performing a familiar ritual. His eyes gleamed with resolve. Before departing, James stepped onto the porch and took one last look at the sea. The waves still rolled onto the shore, and the wind still blew as if nothing had changed. But James knew that another battle awaited him somewhere beyond the horizon. He murmured to himself, "A soldier never truly retires. We only pause until the next mission calls our name." When the military vehicle arrived to pick him up, James climbed in without hesitation. The young soldier driving glanced at him in the rearview mirror, unable to hide his admiration. "Captain, how many times have you done this?" the soldier asked. James smiled faintly and replied, "More than you can count. But each time feels like the first, not easy, but always worth it." The vehicle rolled away from James's home, disappearing into the night. At a nearby military base, a rescue ship awaited, ready to carry James to the heart of danger. In the dim glow of the floodlights, James's face reflected unwavering determination. His heartbeat quickened not from fear, but from the knowledge that this mission might very well be his last. And he was ready. As the eastern sky began to brighten with the first light of dawn, the rescue ship powered up, carrying James out to sea. Once more, he sailed into peril to save the lives of young soldiers. The challenges ahead did not daunt him. The last image was of James standing on the ship's deck, gazing into the distance toward the horizon. A thought crossed his mind. When a soldier leaves the battlefield never leaves them. A new journey begins for James. What do you think of his unwavering dedication? Could this be his final mission? Share your predictions in the comments. The story of James Holloway continues, and we need you alongside him. Follow now so you won't miss the next chapter.